Now, Mr. Trump understood that in this changing world, Americans were being squeezed. And he was right about that. And you should understand that we're still in that situation, and Mr. Trump is president because of it. Here's how it works. Every empire, as it goes down, has the following procedure of handling it. The people at the top, the rich and the powerful, respond to the decline by saying, oh, this is terrible, but not for me. The top always offloads the difficulties and burdens of a decline onto those people less powerful and less rich than themselves. The emperor in Rome didn't suffer the way the average people did. The emperor in Persia or the emperor in Greece, it doesn't matter. All the empires show the same phenomena. Those at the top hold on, work harder than they used to hold on because they know damn well it's going down. And who can't do that are the people who don't have much power and the people who don't have much wealth. And so the working class has to be, one way or another, squeezed as you go down. And we, you, me, we're all being squeezed. And in our naivete, we turn to the Republican and Democratic Party. Protect us. They can't. Oh, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear. You know that. We live in that. But they can't do anything. Because the only real thing to do would be to say honestly to the people, well, our empire's going down, it's going to be a hard thing, and maybe we all ought to get together to try to get through this difficulty together. Oh, that would be an interesting idea. We'd have a name like, I don't know, socialism. That would be rational. But we don't live rational. How do you squeeze the mass of people? A lot of ways. It's a little bit like that famous poem, you know, how do I love thee, let me count the ways. How am I going to screw the working class? Let me count the ways. So for 40 or 50 years, we make sure that unions can't function. They can't do what they were invented to do, help the workers get a better deal. Not going to get that. We're going to demonize unions. We're going to make every union look like it's, you know, that movie On the Waterfront, a bunch of crooks that are grabbing your dues every week, et cetera, et cetera. You've been living your life in that kind of an environment. It's changed the last few years as working people begin to get it. And they are. That's part of what this meeting is a sign of. Beginning. The Starbucks workers are beginning, and the Amazon workers are beginning. The labor movement is kind of coming back to life, but it's coming late in the process of squeezing the working class. Here's another way you squeeze the working class. You have this thing which you say is some kind of mystery. It's called an inflation. What? An inflation sounds like something you do to a balloon. What is an inflation? In economics, it just means prices are going up. But now let's be a little bit more careful. If you know anything about the inflation of the last few years, here's a little statistic. The inflation has gone up faster than average wages and salaries of people. Okay, now I'm going to do this very difficult arithmetic. If the money you have to spend, your wages and salaries, are not going up as fast as the prices, there are going to be things you can't afford anymore. You know, really special, expensive things, like eggs. What? But will someone honestly tell you that the inflation is a way of squeezing the workers? Not, you look long and hard, you won't get it. The inflation in eggs is due to bird flu. Huh? What? I'm talking to people, I'm not going to be mean, but half of you believe that. And the other half of you think it might be true. Here's what an inflation is. It's a decision made by some people to jack up the price you have to pay for the things they can control the prices of. Who sets prices in a capitalist economy? Answer, the employer. Those of you who have had jobs all your life as workers, do you ever recall being called into an office to add your opinion as to what the price should be of what you helped to produce? Never happened. The United States Census tells us 3% of Americans are employers. Welcome to the other 97%. That's you and me. The employers set the prices. We pay them. When they jack up the price, that's because they want to give us fewer of whatever it is they make for the money we have to give them. It's a way of screwing the working class. And that's how it's been used in the last few years. And all these economics professors, including many of mine and people I know, sit around debating, how are we going to control the inflation? What is it? And how does it happen? I sit there, I'm one of their students, and I want to run up there and hit them over the head with a ping pong paddle. What are you doing? What is this noise coming out of your mouth? And then their decision, which really, at this point, I hope I'm getting to you, you're getting upset. Their decision is we're going to deal with it by raising interest rates. Oh, wow, this is wonderful. Who gets screwed when you raise an interest rate? In case you're not rich yourself, I'm going to tell you, it's not rich people. They don't give a flying whether the interest rate is 2%, 6%. They're rich. That's what it means to be rich. You don't care. But you have to care because it's going to mean that little bit of money at the end of the month that you have to pay on your credit card is going to be bigger than it was before. And everything works like that. The rich don't care. You know what that's like? It's like, I'm going to stick it to you now for a moment, congestion pricing. Oh, good. We have a problem in New York with traffic. This should come as hot news. It's only been true for a century. And we're going to finally do something. Oh, really? Yeah, what? We're going to tax everybody the same. What? The same. A rich person who will not give a damn, and the poor person for whom this adds up as an extra buck or two every time you do something, if you have to come in and out of Manhattan, etc., etc. Only an American politician who's just seen what inflation has done to people would come up with that solution. And by the way, raising interest rates, because I can see it perked some of your interest, is that the only way to deal with inflation? Of course not. Why did you ever think it? Answer, because that's what you were fed all the time in all the media. The last time the United States had an inflation as bad as the one a couple of years ago, right, was back in the late 70s and 80s. We had funded the war in Vietnam by printing a lot of money because otherwise the people would have revolted against it. If you'd said to everybody, we're having a war in Vietnam, it's going to cost every family a couple $1,000 a year. Whip, end of war. So we borrowed. We printed money and we borrowed. And then we had the terrible inflation. And then a conservative Republican president, Richard Nixon, went on the television August 15th, 1971, and said, I'm going to do something about this terrible inflation. Oh, good. There was tremendous suffering in the country and a lot of pressure. And put that together with the problems with the war, he had to do something. So he declared a wage price freeze that day, 15th of August. As of tomorrow morning, he said, this conservative Republican president who became president by becoming the champion of anti-communism. As of tomorrow morning, he said, any business that raises its prices, we will come for you, we will arrest you, and you go to jail. Guess what? The next morning, inflation vanished. Amazing. Are you surprised? Shouldn't be. Is this a story about how you control an inflation? Yeah. Did it work? Yeah. Did it happen in the United States? Yeah. Do you know about it? No. And the people at the Federal Reserve who decide interest rates, they made sure not to ask about it, not to talk about it, not to debate it. Let me give you another example, because I think that perked some of your interest. In the early 1940s, the United States decided to enter and fight World War II. And the economists, who, by the way, included a significant number of Marxists and socialists, because in the 1940s, they would be hired by President Roosevelt at the time because they were considered the most reliable anti-Nazis, anti-fascists. So people like Galbraith, whose name you may know, Paul Sweezy, Harry Magdoff, people, very important people on the left of American economics, were working in Washington. And they went to Roosevelt and they said, okay, you got a problem. You're about to fight a war. You're going to move all these resources, factories, railroads, to work on a war, to supply the army, supply the navy, and fight a war. And those resources are therefore not going to be available to produce food, clothing, shelter, consumer goods. So we're going to have a shortage of consumer goods since we're using these resources, a large number of them, to fight a war. And here's the problem with that, President. If there's a shortage of goods for the mass of people, who presumably will still want to buy underpants and shoes and toasters and all the other things of life. With a shortage, we got a problem. And the president said, well, what's our problem? He said, the market system. The president was confused. I said, I thought we were supposed to be for that. Yeah, but we can't afford it in a war. Why not? They had to explain to him, just like I'm doing now with you. If there's a sudden shortage, then there won't be enough toasters or ice cream cones or fill in the blank. And you know what happens in a market economy when there's scarcity of goods? The people with the money offer more. You'll come with your dollar to the ice cream vendor in the park, and you got your two little kids with you, and you want to buy them an ice cream cone, and you hand him $2 for the 2 cones, and he looks at you and says, I only got 4 cones left. And before you can respond, the person next to you, who you can tell by his outfit is much better heeled than you are, says, I'll offer you $5 for each cone. Guess who gets the cones? If you have a shortage, a market system is a system that allocates whatever is scarce to the people with the most money. Those of you who think of yourself as moral or ethical ought to think about why you support a market system that does what I just said. Really? That's what you want? You want to live in an economy that distributes whatever is scarce to people with the most money? You know what that means? It means that the little bit of milk will be purchased at a high price by the nice rich couple who gives it to their cat. But it will not be affordable to the poor couple who needs it for their children. That's how the market works, Jack. You're supposed to love the market. You're supposed to believe it's efficient. It never was. That kind of argument is what we in academia call bullshit. But it works. Mr. Trump has become president because he knew that the mass of the American people were being squeezed and that the conventional Republicans and Democrats weren't doing squat about it. And he said, I'm different. Watch me. I'm going to be outrageous. I'm going to say the things that were quoted earlier, not quietly and under the table, the way it's usually done, but big and loud and open, all about it. Watch me. And when you got 2 parties that aren't doing anything for you, and you're feeling very squeezed, you give your vote to somebody different. After all, why not? The Democrats had the equivalent. You all know his name. Bernie. He was the different on the other end. The politician who for the first time in half a century didn't run away from the name socialist. Had he run, he would have picked up that same different. Maybe let's go with him. But the Democrats shut down their only chance. And look at them. They suffered the results. Mr. Trump, there's no reason for any of us to imagine he's going to change. He's going to be Mr. Different. That's what he does. And you can already see it. The Israelis made a decision to hitch their wagon with the United States. They made that decision many years ago. Fateful decision. Good in the short run, a disaster in the long run. And that disaster has now come full circle. They're identified in the whole world as a complicit partner in what was done in Gaza. The Israelis went into Gaza to defeat and destroy Hamas. Didn't work. To defeat or eject the Palestinian people. Didn't work. And all that happened 2 days ago was a decision by the United States upon which it depends to cut its relationship with a losing proposition. It's ugly all around. It will not save the United States from being identified as complicit with all that happened there. And the books and articles and documentaries about it will be with us for the next generation. And Hamas, it will inherit the rage and the fury of 2.5 million residents of Gaza who have watched their mother, their father, their children. The young people that are coming are going to be a much greater danger to Israel than the old Hamas ever was. This is a disaster. And most of the world sees it. That's why the votes in the UN are lopsided, 150 countries on the side of the Palestinians, 25 abstentions of the United States, Israel, and the Canary Islands. I mean, it's silly. It's a silly spectacle. But that's another sign of a country going down. Last example. Ukraine. The problems in Ukraine begin with the dissolution of the Soviet Union back in 1989, 1990. Ukraine, a major part of what used to be the Soviet Union, particularly important in grain growing, very, very rich soil, so forth. A lot of finagling of the countries of the West, NATO moving eastward, threatening Russia, and all that. I won't bore you with the rehistory. And then to stop what was happening after NATO took over in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and all the rest, Mr. Putin and the Russians said, no, not Ukraine, not the eastern part of Ukraine, which is majority Russian, and Russian-speaking, Russian language, Russian culture, and so on. And the United States says, oh, good, you invaded, that's a bad thing. We can mobilize the whole world around the bad thing of a big country invading a little country. That sounds good. That was already a mistake, because what was Afghanistan? A big country invading a little poor country. What was Vietnam? A big country invading a... The position of the United States as going to war around the principle of a big country shouldn't invade a little country sounds a little hollow coming from the United States, except, of course, here, where the denial is the governing spirit of the country. And the United States decides to go in for and round up the usual Europeans to go with you. Okay, how do you fight the war? And this goes to something said before, and I want to conclude with. The United States is caught in the decline, discovering that the decline trumps everything else. And I don't mean to be clever by using the word trumps. The nuclear weapons of the United States are useless. The enormity of them, useless. Why? Because if you dared use them in Ukraine, the other side has them too, and will use them. And that made that quite clear. So you can't, because it's self-destructive. That's out. Well, what do you have? Conventional warfare. But then you got another problem. The Russians are better equipped for that than you are. The Russians also have a history, in case you're not familiar with it. Napoleon thought he could defeat Russia. He couldn't. Hitler thought he could defeat Russia. He couldn't. Invading Russia has turned out to be, or fighting Russia, a really bad idea. But the United States, used to fighting such powerhouses as the poorest countries on earth, Vietnam, Afghanistan, didn't make the adjustment, so it can't fight. It realized that within months. So it came up with the great plan, the genius of Mr. Blinken or Jake Sullivan or other people who I hope whose names mean nothing to you, because they sure mean nothing historically. Here's what their great strategy was. A war of sanctions. Oh, we will get the Russians. We will, I'm now quoting President Biden, reduce the ruble to rubble. Somebody with poetic genius gave him that one. The ruble will become rubble, and Russia will fall to its knees. Wonderful images right up there with Mickey and other mouses in the American consciousness. And they did. They stopped. The Europeans, if you know the story, stopped buying oil and gas from Russia, which is a major export of the Russian economy. That would cripple Russia.